Good evening. My name is Michelle Soika, and I have had the pleasure of serving as your GLACUHO president this past year. Thank you for joining us to learn more about the proposed changes to the association, which will be presented at this year's annual conference business meeting. Please feel free to take a look. Please feel free to take a look at our website throughout our time this evening in reference to the bylaws that are being changed. With us this evening are members of the board and members of the various task forces asked to convene to assess the goals and tasks for the second year of the strategic plan. I'm going to turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves by sharing their name, institution, and role with the strategic plan. Paul, can I start with you, please?
Hi, my name is Paul Hubinski. I serve as the past president for GLACUHO this year. I work at Northwestern University, and my role with the strategic plan is to provide support to Michelle and all of the groups that are working on it.
Tiffany, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Gonzalez. I am currently the president-elect of GLACUHO, and I work at the University of Illinois at Chicago. In addition to supporting the strategic plan and working through the next few years with it, I was also the liaison to the host committee task force this past year.
Thanks, Jacob.
Hi, my name is Jacob Knight. I'm the Director of Residence Life at Franklin College. I serve as the Indiana delegate in GLACUHO, and I have served as the liaison with the governance task force throughout this year.
Great, thank you. Matea?
Hello, everyone. My name is Matea Chaluk. I am the Assistant Director for Residence Education at Michigan State University, and I work as the chair for the Conference Host Task Force this year.
Great, thank you. Jocelyn?
Hello, my name is Jocelyn Mall. I'm at Indiana University in Bloomington. I'm currently the 2018 conference host, and I've served on the governance task force for the last 2 years.
Great, thank you. And is Kristen here?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen from Baldwin-Wallace University. I serve on the board as your Ohio delegate, and my role was to proofread the suggestions from the task force, and also to suggest when or how frequently bylaws can be changed for our association.
Great, thank you all for being here. Before we jump into the proposed changes, I wanted to share a little about the strategic plan. In 2014, President Dr. Joshua Lowry convened a group of individuals to come together and review association documents, with the charge of presenting recommendations to the board at the end of their time together. The strategic plan task force focused on 4 goals in their recommendations: financial stability, governance, professional development opportunities and services, and diversity and inclusion. On October 19, 2015, the board of directors voted to approve the strategic plan. In year 2, 3 task forces and a work group were created to take a look at the goals and tasks for the second year: Financial Task Force, the Governance Task Force, the Host Committee Structure Task Force, and the Diversity and Inclusion Work Group. With the exception of the Diversity and Inclusion Work Group, each group has a board liaison assisting with the work of the task force. The board of directors has received reports from the Governance and Host Committee Structure Task Forces, which they have voted to move forward to present to the membership of the association. Before we move forward, I want to open it up to questions anyone may have about what has already been shared, or about the strategic plan updates that are on the GLACUHO website. Hearing none, I will now ask Jacob to provide a summary of the governance work leading up to the proposed changes. Jacob?
All right. So as Michelle has shared, and as you heard from Jocelyn's introduction, the governance task force has been a 2-year sort of process. So the original year, which I will, as I go forward, refer to as sort of the 2016 version of the task force, put together a number of final recommendations after spending a year really looking at how should GLACUHO's governance change. And in many ways, what happened was they handed it off to the 2017 task force to kind of continue with that and put together the actual bylaw changes that are moving forward right now. So I'm going to talk through the final recommendations from the 2016 task force, and then what was and wasn't implemented, and provide some rationale for that, and sort of what made it into the bylaw changes that are currently being considered. So first and foremost, the 2016 Governance Task Force really wanted to shift away from the elected board, or sorry, not shift away, but make sure that the elected board term is a 2-year term. There's 2 positions that have an exception to that on the elected board, which is the treasurer and the tri-president. And basically everybody is serving conference to conference, and this was something that they considered changing. And when we reviewed that as the 2017 task force, which I'll get into in a little bit, it wasn't something that moved forward, partially because so much of our business culminates at the conference. It would be weird to have a transition that happened before the conference. So the election period, that was part of that process. So they had recommended elections occurring in May 1st to May 31st as an online election, and that is going to continue, but then they wanted or encouraged us to consider a transition period from June 1st after the elections are concluded until August 31st, and then on September 1st, kind of the transitioning over and actually the taking over of position. So we kept the idea of a transition period because that is one of the things that many of our elected board members have said is it's really tough to get elected at the annual conference and then the next day assume that role. And even for some of our committee chairs, it gives more lead time into if we have elections and appointments earlier, more transition time for better preparedness to take on those responsibilities. The 2016 Governance Task Force recommended eliminating the past president role, and this was something that even within our group we had a lot of conversations about. And some of that was when we talked with the current GLACUHO board and shared what the previous conference or task force had recommended and sort of our ideas for moving that forward. There was some resistance and some concern about is this really the right choice? And so we decided to spend more time actually looking into that. And part of that process was reaching back out to past presidents to see what recommendations and what feedback they have about the role of past president, and is it critical to keep that, or is that a position that could be retired? And ultimately, we talked with 11 past presidents, and the overwhelming feedback was this is such a critical role to the organization that we just could not see a way to eliminate that and shift around responsibilities in a way that our organization would stay healthy. And so that recommendation was sort of killed. The 2016 task force also recommended creation of a committee delegate, and so this was part of trying to transition from board meetings where it's elected board and appointed board being present to meetings where it's truly elected board members because they're the ones that have the ability to vote on financial decisions. And so the recommendation was to create a committee delegate that would sort of serve as the representative for all committee chairs if they could not be present for a board meeting. And so they outlined what the responsibilities of this position would be, sort of the timeline and things that they would work on and work with, and this has continued on for 2017, and it's reflected in the bylaw changes. So committee chairs, if these bylaw changes are accepted, their responsibilities within the organization would shift, and they would no longer be required to be at all the meetings they currently are at. Some of that, when we have done elected board meetings before, we've had call-in conversations with people, and so I think that practice could continue, but that would ultimately be at the discretion of the president. If there was something where a person really needed to be present for, we could get them connected through technology, or if they are in close enough proximity, they might be able to attend, but that would always be the president's call going forward. The 2016 Governance Task Force also recommended adding a lot, or sort of beefing up the requirements and recommendations for things that you need to have to hold those positions. So minimum years as a full-time staff member, and some things like that. And so those were built into the new bylaw changes, including some things that were not just from the Governance Task Force, but from the 2016 Financial Task Force, and some of their recommendations of what a treasurer should have for to meet that position requirements. And so each of those has been added, and that was accepted into the bylaws, or the bylaw proposal. And let's see. The other piece that would change is with the committee structure. Committee chairs, instead of being appointed at the October elected board meeting, if we do elected board meetings or elected board elections in May, we would then use our summer meeting as the time to do those appointments, so that they could be transitioning starting in the summer and moving forward. So I think that is it for the kind of the summary of the changes. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take those. Jocelyn would also be a good person who could field questions, because she has served on the task force for 2 straight years.
Thanks, Jacob. I'm now going to ask Matea to share some insight from the conference host structure group.
Thanks, Michelle. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody who was on the task force, which was Joe Rosalie from Western Illinois, Amanda Stonecipher from Indiana University Southeast, Stacy Oliver Sikorsky from Lake Forest College, and then Doug Howell from Butler. So I'm just going to provide a brief summary of kind of our proposed changes. As you all know, currently the conference is hosted by state. So each year there's a new state that is putting their bid in to be able to host the conference. And so one of the things that we talked about was eliminating the state rotation. So our proposal is that beginning in the 2020 conference, that there will no longer be a state rotation, but any state could potentially be a site to host the conference. The other piece of our proposal and the recommendation is to have a host and a co-host on the board, so similar to the Programming and Development Committee currently, where they have a chair and an assistant chair. And then those individuals would be the ones who would assemble a committee of various GLACUHO members in the region to kind of serve as that host committee. So only one school would necessarily host and have their employees there as people who are on the team to assist with the conference, but it could be anyone from any state who could potentially serve on this committee in order to be able to get some of that experience, and then also provide a great conference experience for our members. The other piece of this is that we would like to then have this host and the co-host create an RFP, so a request for proposal, which would then be sent to various cities in the region, specifically to their convention and visitor bureaus, and they would work directly with those convention and visitor bureaus to identify a host site. And so they would work with those individuals as well as the board to identify a host site moving forward. And then also I just wanted to note that, we've proposed this new committee, which wouldn't necessarily be an institution, but we've also made a caveat in there that if a higher ed institution wanted to host a conference, that would not be excluded, so they would still be able to do that if they would like. And so that's basically all of our suggestions and recommendations. And the individual, as I mentioned earlier, were all previous conference hosts, so we had a lot of great discussions and a lot of going back and forth on what we thought would be great recommendations, and so those are kind of the main ones that we decided to move forward and propose to the board and the membership.
Great, thanks, Matea. As we move towards the annual conference business meeting, it's important to the board members that we share the progress made on the strategic plan with the members of the association. It is also important that we share the impending changes that will be presented at the business meeting in a few weeks. There are three major themes to the updates being presented: governance, conference host structure, and bylaw revision timing. In the governance area, as Jacob has highlighted, the focus was on the objective of defining the visionary responsibilities versus the operational responsibilities of the board of directors. The proposed bylaw revisions include splitting the board into two bodies that reflect the objective. Additionally, the creation of the committee chair liaison was added to the board of directors and will be the liaison between the committee chairs and the board of directors. The revisions also reflect a practice that is already in place in the exhibitor liaison and technology coordinator, who serve in a ghost year prior to their 2-year term. With regards to the annual conference committee, the revisions support moving to an RFP model, as Matea just mentioned, and that will open the opportunity to any local convention and visitor bureaus to bid on hosting the annual conference. The revisions also include restructuring the host chair and removing it from being associated with an institution, but rather an appointed position with an assistant chair. Lastly, when looking at the bylaws and the implementation of changes, the bylaws currently state we would only be able to change them when we come together in person at the annual conference. The revision is proposing that bylaw changes can be sent to the board for consideration on a quarterly basis. This will aid in the ability to move the association forward as we continue to work through the strategic plan, as well as stay relevant in our field of housing and residence life. At this time, we'd like to open the floor for any questions or comments from the group. Hearing none, we thank you all for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the annual conference.